All right. So this representation diagram, Paige and I in particular in our area here, we know a lot of teachers that have made this into a poster and put it in their classrooms. However, our primary grade teachers mentioned that this diagram doesn't really work for them because of the words. So this is our primary version of this. And this diagram is in the slides for you to have, and it's also in the resource folder as additional handouts. In fact, we're finding some of our upper elementary teachers actually are preferring this diagram as opposed to the other one with the blue ovals, because it reminds the students as well as them the importance of these different types of representations.
So some key messages to take away that we'll just briefly summarize is that this is a high leverage teaching practice, teaching with and through representations. And for each of us to have a goal to have our students really develop this ease and flexibility, and that for us as teachers to really be aware that we want to attend the different direction the arrows go, so that we are supporting students to make connections between and also among representations. In the research, some of the words and terms that come up is flexibility, fluency, thinking, and versatility. And all of this is really driving toward this idea of ease, that students have had so many different experiences that they feel very confident and flexible, choosing representations and seeing the connections, which brings us to the role of each of us as the teacher, and how are we using purposeful questions to support students to make these connections. So that's our second teaching practice we're going to focus on tonight. And so we're grounding ourselves back in this framework and pose purposeful questions. We're going to consider how that might support our students to use and connect mathematical representations and make sense of the mathematics. When we think about posing purposeful questions, we want to be posing questions that also help us assess what students know and also advance their thinking forward. So to do that and to consider what that looks like, you're going to get a chance to look at another artifact.
Okay. So we are going to venture into and visit Miss Bouchard and her first graders. And they are engaged in the Hungry Caterpillar task. And many of you are already thinking, yep, one of my favorite books, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. So Miss Bouchard was reading this book to her first graders one day. And as you know the story, in case you don't, on Monday, the hungry caterpillar ate through one apple, but he was still hungry. On Tuesday, he ate through 2 pears, but he was still hungry, and so on. But the question that Miss Bouchard posed to her students was, how many pieces of fruit did the hungry caterpillar eat during the week? Because as you know, he eats many other things as well. But she asked them about the fruit in specifically. So these first graders were really being asked to add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. That's a pretty challenging task for first graders to keep track of all of that information and to think about how they could use that information in different representations to find the total number of pieces of fruit. So we have pulled another artifact out of the book, and we're going to send you back to your same breakout groups so that you can kind of just continue the conversation you've started. And Paige already put the link to the transcript in the chat. You can click on that and bring it up. But this is what we would like you to do. To first take about a minute as an individual and read through the discussion excerpt and ponder and think about what was the purpose behind each of Miss Bouchard's questions. Why do you think she asked that particular question to those students? And then also think about which questions really were revealing insights into students' understanding of the math as well as to their strategies. And the other thing I usually point out is that a question can have more than one purpose. So you're thinking about the purpose, think about maybe the dual nature of some of those questions as well. So we're going to give you probably only, it's going to be a little quick, 4 or 5 minutes in your breakout rooms. So take about a minute to read, and then you'll have about 3 minutes just to have a short conversation about some of those questions and what you were noticing. Okay, we'll see you back here in 4 to 5 minutes. Welcome back. We realized that was just a dabble really into a conversation that could go on for much longer. But you have the transcript, you can continue that conversation with others, and then there's more discussion in the book too, and analysis of that transcript. But a few things that to share about those questions. In Principles to Action, we identified really 4 main types of questions. We again looked at the research and looked at different questioning frameworks, and it seemed like they all kind of centered on these 4 main ideas of gathering information, probing thinking, making the math visible, encouraging reflection and justification. Now, my co-author Vic Bill and I, when we were writing the Taking Action Elementary book, we decided to also include a 5th type of question, engaging with the reasoning of others, which you can, I'm sure you noticed that Ms. Bouchard used numerous times throughout that short discussion. But, we really wanted to emphasize that it's important at all levels, but, we want to build those communities in our classroom of young learners where they are listening to, engaging with each other. So we wanted to highlight the importance of this 5th question type, engaging with the reasoning of others. So in the Taking Action book, you actually find discussion of all 5 of these types. So in looking at that transcript, these are just a couple questions from segment 1. So you'll notice Ms. Bouchard was probing children's reasoning, gathering some information, and engaging the students with each other. In this first segment, most of Ms. Bouchard's questions were really at the assessing type of question. She was trying to get in the kids' heads, and probably more importantly, get the kids into each other's heads and reasonings so that they could have a more productive whole class discussion. Now, keep in mind, these are first graders. The second part of that transcript, really the questions got a little meatier and got more deep into the mathematics because Ms. Bouchard was really thinking about what is the math I want to surface and make visible for these young learners to have a conversation about? And then what questions might I want the children to engage in reflecting on these math ideas and justifying? So that second segment, while it still had some probing and engaging questions, there were these types of questions that really raised the mathematics. Really kind of pushed and pressed kids to think about the math ideas. I mean, these were 2 questions I just pulled out of that segment that I liked. Wow, we had different equations, but we got the same answer. How does that work? That's an important conversation for first graders. And then the lines 27 to 28, that's really pushing that idea of how you can use 10. All right, so this is actually a table in the book, but I like to highlight as we think about these 2 types of questions, because the teaching practice said we should assess and we should advance with our questions. So I think of assessing as questions to uncover children's reasoning. Usually as teachers, when we ask an assessing question, we stand there and we listen intently to what the child is saying or what they want to show us. Whereas advancing type questions, well, those are those where we might ask it and then kind of walk away. You know how you do that, right? It's like, I'll come back after I walk around the room. Or I guess now it's hopping from one breakout room to the next breakout room and coming back. But we want to give students time. Like we might walk away or we might give them this long wait time so that they have to start to figure out how to proceed on their own. And that's the big part of that, is how to proceed on their own. So the assessing questions is really about providing information to us as a teacher about kids' understanding. And then the advancing questions are really where we're prompting students to think more deeply about a math idea that perhaps often they're not even currently considering, or maybe they mentioned it and we want them to push more deeply.
Some key messages to consider hanging on to after the session is to balance the different question types that we pose to students so that we can support them getting to different reasoning. We also think that questions married with wait time are really important tools for teachers. If we up our game on asking questions, but we don't provide students with wait time, we're not really going to get any farther. And we know in the United States, we really struggled to give adequate wait time that really encourages and empowers kids to think. We also want to really be intentional when we're choosing to different question types, such as assessing and advancing. So thinking about our time together tonight, it now is that time that we alluded to at the beginning. It is time to take action. So as you are getting ready to unplug your technology, hopefully for the night after our time together, to summarize some of our time together, we'll go back to this framework, and we want you to think a moment about posing purposeful questions and using and connecting math representations. And we would like you to enter into the chat something that you are committed to taking action on for yourself. Maybe it's something like taking some more wait time as you're working on questions. Who knows? So please add into the chat so that we can get ideas from each other as we are pulling together our time together this evening.